Everything is Awesome is part of Courts and Parts, a podcast network featuring pop culture, TV, movie, and geek podcasts. Check out some of our other shows, like TV Ate My Brain, Let's Chat with Revelin Friends, and Podstalgic at courtsandparts.com.
Awesome.
Just tell people they're awesome and mean it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?
Awesome. 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 That was awesome. You guys are awesome. No, you're awesome. No, you are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I am your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. And I'm very excited about this conversation that I had today. This is one of those weird ones where, like, it's not often that people contact me and say, hey, I want to be on your show. But this was a great conversation with Alex Schumacher. Not that Schumacher, no relation, as we get into in this show. But he is a writer and a cartoonist. He does Decades of Inexperience, Mr. Butterchips, and it is great little comics, web comics and whatnot. We talk about comic books, we talk about web comics, we talk about how he got into it and all. I don't have to tell you here, you're about to listen to it. Make sure you check us out on awesomepodcast.com. We're on Twitter at RealAwesomePod. That's also our Facebook at RealAwesomePod. You can hit us up on Instagram at Awesome Podcast. I need to use that more. You can hit me up on at That Nerdy Kev, of course. All the cool things. Patreon.com/thatentertains. Throw some support our way and get some extra bonus material at times. And that's all. I don't want to hit you over the head with too much now. So we'll be back on the other end to wrap things up. Here is my conversation with Mr. Alex Schumacher. Yeah, and you have been, like, you've been tagging me in some of your work on Twitter.
Yeah.
So it's because you messaged me to be on the show, right?
I did.
If I'm remembering.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we connect? Like, did you start following me because someone else said follow Friday? Like, how did we connect on Twitter?
Yeah, I believe that's what it was. And then you and I had connected because you had your personal Twitter, and then I saw that you were a podcast host as well. So I looked up the podcast and thought I'd throw out a line, put out some feelers, and see if you'd be interested.
Yeah, I never say no. It's rare for me to say no, I should say.
It makes me feel so special. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, but it does make me feel special because I'm not used to. It's you coming to me makes my job so much easier because normally it's me hunting people down, and it's ask anyone that does an interview type show and or even just booking a guest on any show. It's just a pain.
Sure. I'm glad to hear that I don't come off as just some, attention-starved stalker or something.
Well, I mean, I didn't say that.
No, you didn't. I know. No, you were saying that it makes your job easier, so that is good for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's get to the origin point of you and, what got you into art, and specifically if your what you're tagging me in leads me to say down the path of comics.
Yeah, it's definitely comics. I started drawing when I was young, as I really do believe that almost every kid draws. There's this natural compulsion to doodle as you're a child, and most kids grow out of that for, I don't know, pragmatic reasons, or just they're maybe more grounded in realism than the rest of us. But I got quite a bit of encouragement as I was growing up from my parents and several teachers in elementary school who believed I may show some talent or proficiency for drawing and illustrating. And so I just continued to do it, and pursued comics, and I've taken a couple of versions to try and do syndicated comic strips at one point and animation at one point, but I've always ended up finding my way back to comics.
Yeah, that's at least how today's kids are learning, like to do basic functions that I don't really remember drawing in school to learn, but maybe that's what you did when you're in kindergarten.
Right.
I'm just making it up that's what they're doing now, but that's my son started kindergarten this year, and you can. Hey, yeah, you're right. Every kid draws, and I'm sure I did when I was in kindergarten as well, or even when I was younger than that. And it hasn't improved much since then. But my son, you can see like how he drew what he thought a person looked like, before he started kindergarten, and the progression he's made over the last several months. But that's like totally how they teach now, is if they do kid writing where they're just sounding it out, if they can figure out just basically like the syllables of the letters and how like dinner might end up being DINNR and it's missing that E, or it's missing an N and it might be just DINR or something like that. But they also today in fact they were learning about whales, and he shows me his project to show that he understood and comprehended the story that they read and whatnot. And the teacher interpreted the pictures for us so we could see that he drew all these facts about whales, and that's how he's learning to eventually be able to write, I guess. But it's neat that they're using art to kind of I guess get the kids to express their comprehension and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Art, comics, any of those arts are definitely a way to interpret the world around you. And especially when you're younger, I think that visual stimulus makes more sense than just reading text in a book or, information on a page or on a screen, I guess it would be now, because kids probably don't use paper like we did when we were young anymore. But yeah, I definitely think it's a way to interpret the world around you, and it still is for me and other graphic storytellers. But that's why I think it's something that all kids do, because it's a language that they can understand. It's a language that anyone can understand. It's universal. So then, I think some people end up just growing out of that, different interests. And then there are those of us who are just masochistic enough to continue doing it and try to make a career out of it.
Well, now, do you think that can anyone draw good? Like, because for me, I want to say I didn't really fall out of it, and I still to this day will doodle during a conference call or a meeting that I really don't need to be part of, but I'm there anyway. Right. I'll find myself doodling, and it's not. I guess if I take my time, it's good for me, but it's definitely not on the level of anyone that considers themselves a professional or even semi-professional or is taking the time out to do like a webcomic or whatever. Sure. It's not that good. And so, and I would venture to say that my interest in drawing kind of it's I don't want to say it stopped, but it basically stopped becoming like a thing that I wanted to do on a regular basis when I realized I didn't have the talent. So do you think that's something that you just have the talent and that's why you continued on with it? Or if I decided to stick with it, I could have learned to draw as well as you?
I think if you stick with it, you can definitely learn. I mean, definitely sort of the techniques and the principles and developing your own style and things of that nature, which I find to be integral. Art isn't something that you can necessarily learn to do, but absolutely, the techniques and the basics, I believe anybody could learn, and then you can build upon that. For me, I feel, even if I write a book that ends up selling 1 million copies, I'm sure for myself, I'll still end up feeling like a fraud to some degree. But like I said, I received a lot of encouragement growing up. So whether or not I had talent, people always sort of pointed that out as something that I had a little bit more of an aptitude for, as opposed to something like athletics. or
Mm-hmm.
math. That was always something that came very naturally to me, the storytelling and illustration. So and talent is subjective too, so saying that one person is better than another is a little bit I think a rigid sort of distinction to make when you're talking about things like art, because it's all based, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I really think that rings true for things, especially for cartooning, because you see everything from Mobius, who does these incredibly intricate drawings, all the way down to somebody like Scott Adams, who does Dilbert. And
Yeah, but even
you have
like
people-
I feel like even Dilbert is a talent that I don't have. To me it's almost like to equate it to sports and to equate it to like basketball or something, like I would, no matter how much I tried at basketball, I'm never going to be NBA, have that NBA talent. And I think the same,
Yeah.
like, whereas I might be able to get better at basketball, I might be able to get better at drawing. I feel like there's people like you and people that are, and maybe it's because of the passion or whatnot, but that just are naturally have that talent that it makes it easier / puts you ahead of the game.
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, though. Going back to the basketball reference, I'm lucky there's no height requirements for cartooning, or else I would be shit out of luck, because I'm like 5'7". So, but as far as you said it perfectly. I think where you just end up developing a passion for it, and it's something. And that can be people develop that for different things. Some people develop it for mechanics or engineering or genetics, whatever it is. And mine just happened to veer towards graphic storytelling, and that was just something again that I was encouraged to develop, and met a couple of art teachers and mentors in the industry along the way who further encouraged it and sort of galvanized me to continue on with it. Or else, I don't know, I may have given up at some point too. And there have been several intervals along the way where I may have thought about giving up, but I think for me at this point, it's just something that I have to do. It's something that's innate to my being at this point, where I would be miserable if I wasn't creating or storytelling or drawing in some fashion. At this point, I definitely think it's something that I need in my life.
So were there any specific like comic book artists that, or not, I mean, they don't have to be comic book artists, but any kind of particular artist that you, inspired you to start drawing or keep on drawing, or that you try to mimic a style after?
Yeah, most definitely. As far as, I think when everybody starts, you're sort of regurgitating all of your influences, and you put them through that creative blender, which is sort of how you arrive at your style someday. And it's not even that contrived. I don't think you don't necessarily plan on it. I think at some point you just go through all of these different waves of influences and then suddenly find, oh, I have a recognizable style. So for me, that started probably, when I was 6 or 7. My grandparents, who have since passed, gave me this incredible Smithsonian collection of comic strips, I believe it's called. And so it had everything from the beginning of the comics, like the syndicated comic strips. So there were people in there like Roy Crane, who did, Captain Easy, and, it had Walt Kelly, who did Pogo, and all of the just incredible original comic strip artists. And then, sort of in my early 20s, it was sort of the golden age for indie books. So I got really into people like Evan Dorkin, who did Milk and Cheese, and Mike Allred, who did Madman, and the Smith Brothers, who did Odd Job, and all of those people. And then I met a bunch of other artists when I moved up to the Bay Area, people like Maury Turner, who did the Wee Pals, which was like the first integrated comic strip, and Michael Jancy, who did The Norm, who were very influential to me and integral to my development. not just as encouraging me, but willing to actually give me points and tell me where I can improve and what I was doing wrong, and how to sort of correct those things. And it's not as demeaning or maybe insulting as it sounds. They were actually very nurturing with that, which I appreciated and I still appreciate. And even later on now, I've discovered people like John Durf Backdurf, who did My Friend Dahmer graphic novel, which was recently turned into a movie, and Alison Bechdel, who did Fun Home, and these very sort of mature, stylized graphic novels that are gaining a lot more traction now, which is wonderful to see. And so I think you tend to go through several different styles and influences and periods of things that you're viewing and looking at the time. And I'm also very influenced by things like novelists and movies, and for me, you have to allow all of those things to influence you when you're storytelling, because if you are just sort of modeling what you do off of comic books, it's going to come out very derivative in a lot of ways, because that's all you're doing is, again, sort of regurgitating what you're seeing as opposed to crafting a more individual style. So yeah, for me, it took several different iterations of what I'm doing now to actually arrive here.
So did you gravitate more towards, because you've talked a lot about comic strips, did you, and to me, that's like, I'm thinking like newspaper comic strips versus like a Marvel or DC comic book. Am I misinterpreting what you're saying?
Right.
Or did you gravitate more towards that kind of comic?
Yeah, it was definitely the newspaper comics that I was referencing and that I really was into, in my earlier years. And, even now I do still like to go back and read a lot of those. And then a lot of the indie comic strips that were around sort of in the 90s, because there were still a lot of small press newspapers, the alt weeklies and things that were still around. So they would publish things like the K Chronicles by Keith Knight, and those were still comic strips because they'd be sort of one-page self-contained stories, and I really loved those. So no, you're absolutely right that it was more sort of a newspaper style comic strip that I was into sort of in my early 20s or so, and even tried my hand at being a syndicated comic strip artist, which didn't go well, but in my indomitable way, I continued to try regardless of the countless rejections. And, because as you go through attempting to do these things, especially in the creative fields, and that's, music, dance, filmmaking, any of those, rejection is just a part of it. And if you're going to sort of crumble or your spirit is going to be broken every time somebody says no, then you're not really, made for this sort of work. Because you're going to hear that a lot. Even when you're a perceived professional, you still get rejections. So, I kind of veered off on a different tangent there, but so comic strips were definitely a big influence on me.
What even like so? And you said in your 20s. What about when you were younger?
Yeah.
Like, was it still comic strips?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I read comic books when I was a kid too. I think like a lot of kids did when you were young, you read the sort of superhero books, and I certainly did. I loved, Excalibur and X-Men, and my aunt had this massive collection of, comics from the 60s and 70s, the old Batmans and, That's DC's awesome. Finest, and even there was a series of Wuthering Heights that they serialized as a comic book, which she had as well. So that absolutely sort of kickstarted my interest in comic books too. So I was into both, I guess, from the beginning, to be fair.
Because I want to say that, like, and I'm kind of just using I have a bad memory of, especially, going back, over, I'm 33. So going back to when I was a kid, like 27 years ago, I want to say, and I'm only, part of my memory and part of like just seeing what my kid does is like, I remember that like comics, like newspaper comics was like, they were big for me when I, before I knew how to fully read, because they were just like little quick, like 3 to 4 block stories, and oftentimes like you didn't even need to read the words to know or understand. Like Garfield, I don't think you need the actual words to get the story that's being told there. Though you could, I love. As a kid, I think you're still getting the innocent story that's being told on paper. As an adult, you get that Tumblr, was it Garfield Without Words or something?
That's my favorite iteration of Garfield, man. Garfield minus Garfield is absolutely brilliant.
That's what it is. Garfield minus Garfield. That's what it is. So there's
just
still
paints
words.
John as this like sociopath, and it's amazing. it's far funnier than the newspaper version.
Yeah, and the newspaper version, like I mean, I'll read it once in a blue moon, just because my kid will get like his grandma will give him the comics from the Sunday paper or whatever, and when he's done with it, I'm like, oh man, I haven't read comics like these comics in a while, but so it's still good, and like for me, it's like it's funny looking at all those comic strips that are in there, and as a kid, like it was Garfield, Luann, and
Greg Evans,
Marvin were like the 3 that I gravitated towards. All the other ones I just skipped over. And now as an adult,
there's a hell of a lot of them. Don't feel bad.
Yeah. Well, and now as an adult, it's like I skip very few of them, because the ones that I skipped were like, well, I'm a kid. I don't care what these adult comics say. But now I do.
Sure.
Now I do. And the only one I still skip is Heathcliff, because he's just a copycat, in my opinion.
He's like the bad boy Garfield.
Yeah.
I mean, and to sort of touch on a point that you were making, I think that's such a unique aspect of doing comics and graphic novels as opposed to just writing a book. You have the visual expression as well, and if you're doing your job as an artist, like you said, the reader should be able to know what's going on regardless of whether or not A, they can read, because if they're a kid, or B, maybe if they are reading it and aren't fluent in the language that it's originally written in. I think the artwork speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So, I feel, I always try to keep that in mind when I'm drawing specific tales as well, where I'm trying to make sure that you could probably tell what's going on, or at least glean the gist of the story, regardless of whether or not you could read it or are reading it.
So, did you go to school for I guess an art school?
I should have. I'd probably be far more advanced if I did. But on the same token, there's also a lot of rules and barriers that they give you that you don't necessarily have when you're just learning on your own. Mm-hmm. And plus the fact that art school is just an astronomical amount these days. And even when I would have gone, which would have been 15 or so years ago. The cost was certainly a deciding factor, but it was also just that I always felt that I could learn more actually being involved with it and, learning from the experience of it, as opposed to, being in a classroom and having some instructor give me these constraints and what I can't do. And, I know a lot of people who went to art school who are phenomenal artists, so I'm certainly not trying to, crap all over getting an education as an artist. I just think it works differently for different people. And for me, it was more about, getting into the industry. I mean, just being involved with, other artists and getting out there and actually doing it, as opposed to trying to get some sort of formal education about it.
Well, I think that mindset can be used across the board.
Sure.
Because I went to school for a couple semesters and dropped out so that I could go get a job for my day gig in the real world. And
right.
While I'm currently going back on a very slow basis to get my degree, to just better myself in my current job, the real world experience for me, I agree, was it was far more important to me than sitting down and reading a book telling me how to fix a computer. Like it's not that information I learned 15, 16 years ago it doesn't even it doesn't stand today. Like some of that information is just that kind of stuff isn't around anymore. So it's that, like you said, education is good for some people to learn from a textbook, but I'm right there with you. I'd rather in almost anything, whether it be my day gig with computers, or podcasting or wrestling when I used to wrestle, all these different things that I've done creatively. I like to try to learn on the just on the fly. So it's like I almost went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting back when it was still like not even really they didn't talk about new media. It was all about getting a job in terrestrial radio and whatnot. And I didn't go because I was like, I could just do this internet radio thing, as we called it back in the day, and just kind of teach myself how to do it. And I probably saved tons of money, and I'm exactly where I am today had I gone to CBC.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would have been too. And again, I think education is fantastic, and I believe people who decide to go that route are justified and probably feel that that's the best path for them. And it's just about the individual, really. And for me, it was important about, like you said, just getting out there, getting my, hands dirty and learning how to fail, but learning how to fail better and better, and having that experience of doing it, which was the most important thing for me. And I think something that has definitely contributed to whatever level I've reached at this point. It was just a matter of getting out and experiencing it, as opposed to, getting all these different lessons about specific aspects of it, I think. So,
and you, like, one of the things that I think is wonderful about being, I'm going to assume you're like a Gen Xer / millennial, somewhere in that like border range where, like I am.
I actually just the other day, funny enough, you mentioned that. I was born in 1980.
Okay.
And so, we were sort of in between the Gen X millennial thing. And so I don't know if it was just recently coined, but I just read an article the other day where they came up with a new term for it, which is exennial.
Yes.
for that sort of, and I think it actually may include you too, because it's like 1977 through like 1984, 85 or something like that.
It is. I read.
So you may be just past that.
Yeah, I read that same article. Maybe like a month or two ago. I forget. It was. Yeah. I saw it and I was like, oh my God. And I think it's here's where it's messed up. I think like Generation X, it definitely ends like right before me. And I'm lumped into millennial before this brand new in between one. And like, I've never felt like a millennial because like, I didn't, when I was born, there was literally like, no one had a computer in their house.
No, me neither. And, we were sort of the first generation to go from analog to digital.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was weird that, we were just right in that sweet spot. And I totally, shanghaied what you were about to say because you were starting to ask something else.
No, that's fine.
I went off on a tangent, but it was interesting.
But I didn't read that exennial or zennial. I've been calling it zennial.
That's probably what it is. Yeah,
but that I actually want to say that they cut me out of that too. Like I think it was 1983 was the cutoff. Oh. And I'm like, and I look at it, I was like, but there's no way I'm a millennial because like I'm at that point in my life where there's certain aspects of technology, whether it's social media or just like actual physical technology, that like I'm starting to get afraid of it. And this is like a tech guy,
sure.
Like, and that's no millennial's afraid. Like every millennial, no matter what social media comes out there, they jump on it and they love it. And like. I ended like Twitter and Instagram is about as advanced as I get with social media. Things like I don't.
Me too, and I just learned how to use those.
And like, there's like once like Snapchat came around and like became like more than just like sending pics back and forth, and it was like used to tell stories and stuff. I was like, I I I can't use Snapchat. Snapchat is like well beyond what I can do.
Yeah, yeah, no, me too. And there's all of these different ones that seem the turnover rate just seems to be so drastically high. I can't keep up with it, and I'm not even going to try at this point. I have my social media platforms that I use, and and I'm even getting rid of Facebook pretty soon because I'm kind of done with that. And Instagram and Twitter do far more for me anyway, and they're easy because you just go on, you post something, and then you walk away. And I feel like Facebook is just so much more of a commitment when you're trying to sort of market things or promote things. So I'll stick with my Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah, I agree. And Facebook is mainly how I share family pictures with my extended family.
Yeah, definitely.
Other than that, I have a bunch of there's an Everything Is Awesome page and whatnot, and it's good for I think local marketing when you're small business.
Yeah,
it's real good for that.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get
national
when you're
attention.
doing a podcast. Exactly. Yeah. It's Twitter and Instagram, and for me, not so much Instagram because I don't know. I'm talking into a microphone. I'm not. It's more audio.
Yeah, it's harder to do with that for sure. I mean, because I do a visual thing, so it's a lot easier for me to just post a panel of a page I'm doing or something like that. So Instagram is a much better platform for somebody like me, I suppose.
Now that I'm remembering what I was trying to get to with the whole Gen X millennial thing, we both kind of have grown up in, like you said, going from analog to digital, with everything, whether it be just the way we work, the way we communicate, to the way we ingest our entertainment from what used to be paper to Kindle ebook. So because I still when it comes to reading, whether it's a comic book or an actual book, I still prefer a physical copy.
Yeah,
I understand the appeal to the Kindle, and certainly if I was planning on going on a 3-month excursion somewhere, I would probably bring an ebook that I could load a whole bunch of things onto versus 30 books or something.
Backpack full of paperbacks. Yeah,
exactly.
The digital reader is a lot more conducive to having a comfortable vacation.
But at home, I'd rather get my fingers dirty reading a book or reading a comic book.
Me too.
But when it comes to being a creator, and it's not often that we have someone that's musicians are the prime example for me, where when I talk to a musician, especially one that's in our age group and in our generation, that they had to do make mixtapes or CDs and then now go to a digital world. Have you found it easier to kind of create these web comics or comic strips in the digital world versus trying to get them syndicated out into paper, the dying brand?
Yeah, I think the visibility is most certainly something that's a little bit easier to garner in the digital realm than just trying to, again, send it out to alternative weeklies or something like that, magazines, things that don't even exist anymore. So I don't even know if creators would have that choice if they were sort of just starting, nowadays. But definitely for me, and it was a bit of an adjustment. There's that, period of adjustment where you have to sort of figure the new platform out, which I definitely did. And I still draw traditionally. All the artwork is still done with the pen on paper, and then I scan it in and do some cleanup in Photoshop and, little finishing touches like that. But yeah, putting it online and having that ability to literally reach anybody in the world is absolutely something that is beneficial to our industry. Whereas even 10, 15 years ago, that was not the case. And it's remarkable to really think about that, just how different it was even that short amount of time ago, and how quickly the technology has advanced. But yeah, it's most definitely advantageous for us to have some sort of communication tool like that. And for as much as I malign the internet and think it's sort of a cesspool, there are some wonderful aspects about it. And for what it was initially intended to do, I think it does that very well. You know, when we were kids and when it was first coming out, it was called the Information Superhighway, which, you know, I still tend to think of it as that, as opposed to just, you know, a place that houses social media sites, or, you know, porn. But yeah, I mean, I think for disseminating information and for promoting work and getting a name out there for yourself, it's been astounding to what you can do nowadays.
And it's I think like for the shorter form comics and like I'd much rather, you know, read Garfield online versus say Batman. Like it's weird how they're both the same format, both comics and whatnot, but there's something about having something that is like a quick read, just be like not in the newspaper or not me having to fumble through you know, a magazine or something to
Right.
get to like this monthly 3-panel or 1-page, you know, comic versus being able to go online and just like reading it on a daily
Directly
basis.
to it, yeah.
Yeah, it's but with Batman or with Spider-Man or with any of the Marvel, DC, Image, any Sky, whatever, all those indie and major publishers that have the 32 or 22 page books or however long they are these days, those I still think like you don't get the same effect that you do reading the paperback.
Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, it's strange that's the like that there could be like it's the small strip. I don't think you lose anything going from the newspaper to the web, and which is I assume great for trying to break into the business because like as you said, that's just where you're going to be able to hit the most amount of people.
Absolutely. And, you know, part of that too, for me, and I think it may be something that you experience too, the more sequential a story is and the more sort of moving parts that it has, something like, you know, a monthly issue or a 200-page graphic novel or something along those lines, you know, I want to hold that and I want to be able to you know, flip to whatever page I want to flip to. And you know, there's just something about that tactile experience for me of having something like that that is far more pleasurable than reading it online and having to, you know, click a button to go forward or click a button to go back. Whereas, you know, opposed to something like a 1-page comic strip, like you said, or just, you know, a 3-page syndicated comic strip, that's a perfect format for that, is to do that online. But I agree that there's definitely that different experience that you have between those two.
And like and of course I'm leaning more towards like the popular strips and that you like Garfield and stuff that you see in the paper, but
Yeah.
and you might be able to correct me here, but it seems like maybe those ones there's not as much detail, and maybe that's why it translates so well to the web versus being able to, you know, see like a page of Batman, like a splash page of Batman that has incredible detail. I think there is like I think you lose some of it when you go digital versus keeping it in print. Is there do you think there's some truth to that, or
I
am
think
I off mark?
no. There is some truth to that, and with the comic strips specifically, it was because, you know, back in when it first started, sort of the 20s and 30s, and those first comic strips, when they had a large section, a large portion of the newspaper and the page to actually display the art, it was a lot more intricate and a lot more detailed. And as the space in the newspapers diminished for comic strips, and as the comic strips themselves diminished, the details became a lot more sparse, and the drawings became far more simplistic and open because of that constraint where your comic is only going to show up at about 2 inches wide by a half an inch tall or something, and it still has to be recognizable as something, so you don't want to draw a really detailed battleship, because nobody's gonna know what the hell that is at that size. So that's definitely caused some of the change, and so that's been sort of in comic strip, or I'm sorry, in comic books, in like the series, that's been preserved because that's still printed at the same size as it was from the get-go. So all of that detail and all of the artistry that goes into it is still there. Whereas I think comic strip artists their hand was sort of forced, literally, I guess, to become more and more simplistic just because of the size constraints.
So when going with that rationale, if you look at maybe people like yourself who are doing web comics and they don't start out on print, are you putting the same kind of detail that you would put into, say, a 22 page DC Marvel Image IDW comic in your web panels?
To the best of my ability, yes. My level of drawing is not quite up to par with something like the big two, but to the best of my ability, what I can do, I'm definitely doing that on the page, because I'm able to control it at this point on my website or on my publisher Antics Press. We publish it at a pretty decent size, so all the detail that I do put in there is still legible and recognizable. So for me it's not as big of a concern right now, and I think again, Antics is a fairly small publisher, so I work very closely with my editor Francis, and so we have a lot more control over how it will be printed as well. So in that specific scenario, I'm still able to basically render it as complicated or as simplistic as I want, because we have total control over that, which is nice.
Yeah, because something that I noticed is that there's very few these days, in 2018, web comics that actually are only, the classic 3 panels.
Right.
I want to say, like, one that I used to read back when the internet was first there was like Penny Arcade, and Penny Arcade, and I haven't read them in a while, but they were the standard kind of 3 panel comic book or comic strip rather.
Right.
And
right.
But there's ones
one of the first web comics, as I recall. Yeah.
But now you see web comics that are I don't know, is it Looking for Group, that's maybe they do full page web comics on a weekly basis or something. And that is the difference that I see in web comics that are produced in the 20 teens, is that they're not necessarily the 3 panels. They're just, here's a page of a comic book that we're releasing on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and you have a lot of uncharted territory to explore with that too, because the web essentially gives you an infinite possibility of how to set up your comic strip too. So you don't have to necessarily draw it at the dimensions that were industry standards at one point. You can set it up however you want, basically. And you have to keep in mind, if you are ever thinking of doing a collection, obviously, or some sort of print collection, you do need to think in those terms as well. But as far as presenting it on a website, the possibilities are endless, which is kind of exciting. And I don't know that there ever will be a time where they're not endless. That's the sort of interesting thing about having a website and presenting different things on there, because it's gone from comic strips to motion comics, where they take the drawings and animate them a little bit. So there's a lot of different things that I think are still unexplored and untapped that you can do from there. I'm probably more of minimalist and traditionalist, I think. So I don't necessarily think in those terms, but it is exciting to see what a lot of other people are doing, and the people who are, far more Lewis and Clark about it than I am.
So, what was like your first big project on your own? Or, so wait, let me back up for a second. Do you write and illustrate most of your work, all of your work, some of your work?
Now, yes, I've relegated myself to being a one-man operation as far as the writing and drawing goes. And, maybe that's to my detriment. I don't know. I suppose I'll find out. But I did work with writers for a long time, and I worked with some talented people, and I liked the people that I worked with. Just it wasn't the type of storytelling that I wanted to do, I came to realize, and the types of stories that I wanted to tell, very personal stories, I was the person who was going to be able to write those. So I actually took about 1.5 years, 2 years off between like 2014, 2015 to just focus on writing and really hone that part of the craft, because that was definitely the weak aspect of what I was doing, because I never focused on that before. I always pictured myself, an illustrator or, somebody who was just going to do the artwork. And I did that for a long time, and I did a book called The Unemployment Adventures of Aqualung for Arcana Studios, and I did a book for Viper Comics, working with other writers. And, just again, came to a point a couple of years ago where I just knew that wasn't really the route I wanted to go, I wanted to pursue any longer, and took it upon myself to, go down the road that I'm going now.
Sorry, I'm trying to hold back a sneeze.
Okay. I was like, did I lose him?
Yeah, I wanted to give it enough of a pause where there's an edit point, but not too much where you're like,
Fair enough.
What happened?
Yeah.
So, as an illustrator slash writer, is it difficult to like start out that way? I mean, I guess in today's world it's not with webcomics, but even I guess in a more traditional sense, as an illustrator, do you kind of have to be willing to go into the industry saying, all right, I'm going to be an artist first, and then once I prove myself or want to go out on my own or something like that, then I can start writing once I do all that?
I mean, yeah, that's certainly how it happened for me, but I think everybody's different in that way, because some people, are sort of come out of the cartoonist womb fully formed and know what they want to be doing and are writing and drawing their own work from the very beginning. Some people, need a team to work with. Some people, start out, I don't know, editing or publishing, or, there's so many different routes that you can take. So I don't think there's any one sort of gold standard as far as the route that you pursue. It just, ends up what you want to do at the time. And again, for me, I pictured myself as being, the next great comic book illustrator, which quickly became apparent to me that was not going to happen. Some people are illustrators at first. And so I was just saying that I started out like that, but not everybody does, basically.
Yeah. And I guess in the world of 2018, I guess if you wanted to be a writer, illustrator, there's nothing holding you back, because you're not just limited to the big two or even any of the indies. Like, you can literally just go onto, alex.com, create your own website and host your own web blog or webcomic there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing holding people back from creating anymore. And, the possibilities are as large or as small as you can imagine them to be, essentially. And, marketing and promoting, and those are different beasts. So that's why I like to try and work with even small publishers who handle a lot of those sides, because I am not at all adept at trying to promote myself for market. No, that is not my game. So I try to... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, so I was just saying that's why I try to partner up with people as opposed to, failing on my own at that.
And that's the thing in I guess, the double-edged sword of being in this great, technology world and being able to, in 2018, no matter what you want to do as a creator, whether it be an artist or a comic book creator or a podcaster or a filmmaker or whatever it may be, musician and whatnot, is that no longer are you just responsible for the creation of the content. Many times, if you're an indie artist in this new media world, it means you are the CEO, you're the director of marketing, you're the director of IT support, you're also the content creator, and you have to get all this stuff done all by yourself normally. And then some people can, align themselves with people to help out.
That's a harrowing concept to me. That makes my rear end tighten up for just at the thought of trying to do that. But yeah, there are people who are very talented at it and have a lot of, I don't know, I guess, I don't even know if it's experience. They just have the sort of innate, natural instinct towards it, I guess. And has never felt like something that comes very naturally to me at all.
It is, especially with like marketing and getting yourself out there, especially like for me, like unless you're even like I've done like where you get some free advertising credits, even that, like I still like I'm not a marketer. I didn't get into the quote unquote entertainment business to market. I got into it to create and hopefully make a couple people laugh here and there. Yeah. And it's but it's especially when I would assume the same thing with being an artist. Like it costs a lot to do this thing that I offer for free out there for the world. It costs me a lot of money, so I also now have to spend all my time trying to get people to listen to it.
That's a full-time proposition, man. I have a day job, which I'm sure you do too. I think you had mentioned that. And so it's like having two full-time jobs. I essentially do, because I'm there for 8 hours a day, and I come home and work on the comics and the writing for another 6 or 7 hours. So there's it's definitely two full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And that's without the marketing.
But that's something that I've noticed. Like it's just in this new media world, that's just the way it works. And you can, if you really, really, and I don't do this, but if you really, really put your mind to it and your passion behind it, you can. Like I've seen, fellow podcasters who went from being working 40 hours a week at their day job to 40 hours a week on their podcast and whatever they're doing, to being able to make enough money on Patreon and being able to quit their full-time job to focus on this. So it can be super rewarding if you just kill yourself in the beginning to get it done.
Right. And if you know kind of the avenues to explore to do that. And I think for me, I number one, I don't really know how to approach the promotion and the marketing. And number two, I just don't have an interest in it, which I know sounds, I don't know, maybe lazy or sloth to some degree, but I would just rather partner with somebody who will take care of that aspect for me. So I'm not, in a constant state of anxiety about it, because I have enough to make me neurotic. I don't need one more thing.
Exactly. So what is the project, the big project you're working on now? I've heard you allude to it, maybe even drop the name at some point during this discussion. So what are you working on now, and where can people find it?
The two big projects that I have right now, I have a weekly webcomic called Decades of Inexperience, which is published by Antics Press, who I had previously mentioned. You could find the archives, and it's now in the third year, so there's quite a bit to sift through if you'd like to. And that can be found at just decadesofinexperience.com. And then the new episodes are posted every Friday at anticspress.com. And the other one is a monthly comic strip called Mr. Butterchips, which is published by an online literary magazine called Drunk Monkeys, which I think the website there is drunkmonkeys.net. And so that's it's not as contrived as it seems, because Mr. Butterchips is sort of this curmudgeonly, drunken organ grinder monkey. So it would seem that I had created it specifically for that magazine, but it was around long, or he was around long before I had hooked up with them. It was just sort of a perfect storm of finding each other, I guess.
That's awesome. I love it. That website's not easy or not hard to remember at all.
No, it's not. I mean, you just think of what Mr. Butterchips is. He's a drunk monkey, and boom, there you go. That's who you go find. And so Decades of an Experience, the weekly, is a little bit more semi-autobiographical, sort of a 30-something winding his way through life. And then Mr. Butterchips is much more sort of political satire, social commentary, which, saying it through this surly organ grinder monkey just makes it a little more palatable and hopefully a little more funny than it would be if I was just sitting up there, railing against everything.
And it almost sounds like the publisher for that, the online magazine, literally created, like, they heard your comment. Was it published elsewhere beforehand?
Oh, yeah. They've been around for a little while, and we were definitely separate entities before finding one another.
It definitely sounds like they're like, hey, this is a great comic strip. Let's create a whole magazine and build ourselves around it.
No, it was just sort of serendipitous, happenstance that we found one another, and it sort of works perfectly.
That's great. And is there any place that anywhere else people can find you directly if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, they can go to my website is just alexschumacherart.com. And then I'm on, like I said, Instagram and Twitter at AJ Schumacher Art. And I post more on there. Yeah.
And all those links and whatnot to all those places will be in the show notes for people who, like me, don't want to spell Schumacher.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's
yeah.
It's like a litmus test or something for names.
I was when I because I just copy and pasted everything into Zencaster here, and when I did, I was like, Schumacher. Why does that name sound so familiar? And it's not the same, but very similar to, the name is escaping me, and I don't know why, because he ruined Batman with Val Kilmer and George. Is it Schumacher? Joel Schumacher,
and it's Joel Schumacher spelled exactly the same way, rather. And luckily, I am not related to him, because I would disown him if I was.
Yeah,
nipples I don't know why I thought it was, dude. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I don't know. For some reason, when I was looking at your last name earlier, whenever I created the Zencaster session, I was like, man, that sounds like that dude who ruined Batman. But I think it's just very close. But it is the same, and you're not related.
Right. Thankfully,
okay,
no.
Well, as long as you're not related, we can forgive you here at the Awesome Empire.
I appreciate that. For giving a mulligan on that one.
All right, Alex, thanks for doing the show. It was great talking to you and learning a little bit about art.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Kevin.
All right, we'll have to have you back on the show and talk. We didn't get into any pop culture. We normally go on pop culture tangents, and we didn't. We were very good this episode.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to come back on, man, whenever.
Clearly, we'll have to have you back on and just go on a Batman and Schumacher tangent.
Oh, I am down for that, man. I don't think I've exercised all my demons about that, so that would be a good time to do that.
All right. Thanks once again to Mr. Alex Schumacher for being on the show. I loved the conversation. I feel like there was a lot more that we could gotten into, and we just ran out of time. So just another guest that, I want to tap again for a future conversation. Please check out Alex Schumacher on Twitter at AJ Schumacher Art, alexschumacherart.com. All these notes are going to be in all these plugs will be in the notes. But once again, thank you for spending time with Alex and I for this conversation. You could be doing anything with your time, and you chose the last hour or so to spend with us. If you're listening at 1.5 speed, then you know a little less time. That's my little hint for you. I listen to things at 1.5 speed because I have so many podcasts that I listen to that I can't listen to them at normal speed. Anyway, and it means a lot that you're here. If you want to help this show, go to patreon.com/thatentertains. That's a great way to subscribe, get early content, bonus content. It's a great little subscription service that we're trying to build up and give more value with this show and other shows that are on the That's Entertainment Podcast Network. You can also leave us a 5-star rating review on iTunes, whether it's from your phone on Apple Podcasts or from your computer on iTunes. That helps just get more ears to find the show, and the more ears listening to the show means we can do bigger and cooler things like live shows. We're cooking something up for May, so be sure to stay tuned for more information about that. And of course, word of mouth recommendations is free for nothing. You just tell someone to listen to the show, put it on while you're in the car. Say, hey, I listened to this interesting conversation about comic books and getting into art. It was this guy, Alex Schumacher, and he was talking to the host, Kevin Gallagher, about this. And it's, oh my God, it's an amazing conversation. Let's listen to it together. Let's hold our hands like Thelma and Louise and drive off this cliff. Listen to Everything is Awesome. Don't drive off a cliff, guys. Don't do that. But please listen to Everything is Awesome in the car when you have people in there, and just spread the good word of Everything is Awesome. Anyway, that is all I got for you this week. We'll be back with some more stuff as we play catch up and whatnot. That Patreon's getting built up. This is Everything is Awesome, and I am Kev. You can find us on awesomepodcast.com. We are part of the Core Temp Arts Podcast Network on coretemparts.com. We've been awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Core Temp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Core Temp Arts shows, visit coretemparts.com.